You guys ever wonder what baits and tactics fuel a successful tournament angler season? I'm going to break down all the baits by fish catch for the entire season, ultimately giving you my top 5 most successful tourney baits for 2021. Doesn't really matter if you fish tournaments or not, these baits should help your fishing across the board. The results may actually surprise you. This idea was actually inspired by Matt Pangrack breaking down his catches for the entire open season on Bass Talk Live. There are literally thousands of bass fishing lures out there, and it can be so overwhelming whether you're a veteran angler or a new angler to decide what you should be focusing on, what you should be throwing when you're fishing, and a lot of times that leads to confusion. That's the reason I broke down my 14 tournament season across 8 months and several water types and areas, which resulted in 5 top baits that you should be able to focus on going forward to make you a better fisherman. So if you like stats and analytics, make sure you stick around and see the full breakdowns. Here's a graphical breakdown done by bestontour.net about Matt's season that he also articulated on the Bass Talk Live show. So this is spread out over 18 competition days across 9 Bassmaster Opens across several states and different fisheries. Matt landed a total of 84 bass out of a potential 90 bass, which is right at 93%, which is really great rate. He averaged a 52nd place out of 209 boats, which was about 25th percent, or right at that upper quartile of the anglers, which is right on the border of cashing a check on every event. He actually ended up cashing checks in 3 of the 9 events, which was 1 out of 3. Average bass weighs was about 2.5 pounds, which gave him about a 12.5 pound bag for every 5 bass he weighed. His actual weight per tourney averaged to be 11.75 pounds. Interesting note, if you look at the bait breakdown, 81% of his bass, of those 84 bass, were caught on the spinning rods, Neds, drop shots, other finesse, tail spinners, things like that, wacky rigs. So he really relied heavily on the spinning rod to have a pretty successful season. In the end, he was 6th overall in the AOI points and just out of elite qualification. He was right on the cusp of having his goals achieved and making the season that he wanted to have. I found Matt's retrospective analysis to be so interesting, and Matt seemed to have so many key learnings from this, so I decided to dive into some of my fish catches as well. In contrast, here's my tournament catch stats, and we're going to run through some of those too. 14 events, 20 tournament days, so a few more events, but less multi-day tournaments. I weighed 92 out of 100 potential bass, which is 92%, so very similar. Limits in all but 3 of those days. Averaged a 9th place finish, and again, top 26, so really similar, almost right in that top 25%. Cash checks in 5 of 13 events, so a slightly higher percentage, obviously not near the competition level, still below my standards for what I would like to see in average number of checks cash per season for the tournaments that I fish. My average bass was 2.8 pounds or 14 pounds per 5 bass limit, but the actual was about 13 pounds in actual average weighed per day. But here's the crazy thing. Only 5% of my fish were weighed on a spinning rod, and they were all on a stick bait, like a wacky rig general or a yum dinger type situation. And then in the end, I made the final cut at the Bass Nation Nationals, but also just came up short of like the big time goal. So that is another similar parallel to him. The interesting thing here is a lot of power fishing techniques, jigs, frogs, Texas rigs, topwaters, buzzbait, chatterbait, spinnerbaits. Those were my main techniques for catching better than average quality fish and doing well in the tournaments that I fished. It was kind of amazing how similar Matt and my seasons were on many levels, and both came so close to accomplishing our overall goals. Yet we did it in almost completely different ways. If you're enjoying any of this breakdown, finding any of it insightful, do me a favor and tap that like button down below. Now I'm going to take a step deeper and break down the baits and techniques from just the events where I actually cashed checks and had the best success. So here's the graph showing the different baits that I used only in the 5 tournaments that I actually cashed a check in. So you see the pie looks a little bit different and the percentages are much different now. 5 events over 7 different tournament days, 33 out of 35 possible bass, all but the final day of the Bass Nation Northern Regional lacrosse that I have a limit. Averaged about a 2.4th place finish with 1 win. Cash check in 5 of the 13 events. Average bass was 3 1/3 pounds or like 15.5 pounds per tournament day. So that was really good. That was solid. But then again, even the percentage drops down even lower. Only 3% of those fish were weighed on a spinning rod. And I believe that was 1 wacky rig general fish on my final TBF tournament year of the season, which got us a call, which was a big fish. Don't get me wrong. That definitely got us a check that day, and it moved us up in the angle year points. So it made us several $100s on that last fish of the day in that tournament. So it was an important fish, but the spinning rod was not a big part of the fish that we weighed in tournaments. But it did catch a few fish to build some momentum and things like that. But in the end, it wasn't a big player in fish that I actually weighed at the scales. The really cool thing here is frogs were almost 50% of the check catching fish I weighed. Now, that's a little bit to do with some of the tournaments that I fished and where we fished. It was a huge part of it. And it just shows that the frog and the jig and the chatterbait can be really, really big, effective at catching fish. So top 21 baits. Here's the rundown. Starting with number 5, the Carolina Rig Zoom Speed Craw was my number 5 bait. And I didn't catch a ton of fish, but I caught 3 really good quality,
Look at that
3 to 4 pound smallies on Mississippi River on this bait right here. And I know this is going to pain Matt if he ever watches this because he's so anti-Carolina Rig. To me, anything watermelon, green pumpkin, choose your flakes that you like, and those are a good option for a Carolina Rig, especially where smallmouth are present, but largies loves Zoom Speed Craws as well. It wasn't a lot of fish, but the fish I did catch were really good quality, and those were key fish that I wasn't catching in other techniques. So that's my number 5 bait for keys to success for the 2021 season. Number 4, the Texas Rig. Now, there was a lot of different Texas Rig baits that paid into a factor. Tube craws were probably the number 1, both by me and some of the guys that fished with me in team tournaments. Green pumpkins, black and blues, black and neons, these 1099s, all good options. The Fighting Frog caught a key fish down at Nationals on the second day that got me in the final cut, so that was a key bait. Also, the Menace Scrub, the Pit Boss, the D-Bomb, the Baby Brush Hogs, all played key parts and key fish on Texas Rigs throughout the season. All right, number 3, the Jackhammer Chatterbait. And I actually used, a few other chatterbaits like the Super K Clacken and the Z-Man Custom, but the ones that actually weighed fish in the tournament were the Z-Man Chatterbaits. Now, most of the time, I was using one of these 2 Arsenal Tactical Minnows, depending on the size, to catch key fish. But the other one that did catch some important fish was the Big Bites Bait Swim On, which was a really good trailer too. Both smallies and largies caught better than average fish on the Z-Man Jackhammers. Great bait. Even if you don't have jackhammers, other chatterbaits are really good big fish catchers as well. And those are great baits to work into your arsenal. If there's something you don't have a lot of confidence in, it's something you need to pick up and definitely start throwing. Number 2, Bass Tech Tungsten jigs. Now, those are the main jigs I use, and there was 2 main jigs that were for me. The first and most common was a 3/8 or a half-ounce tungsten flipping jig, which is an Arky-style Bass Tech head, often paired with a Speed Craw or a Menace Scrub or something like that. Black, blue, green pumpkin, or the Okie Craw are my 2 favorites and most consistent. The other one that played a big factor, especially later in the year when I was fishing around grass, was this 3/4 ounce grass screw lock jig, which I would put a baby D-Bomb, a spicy beaver on, flip it in grass, and caught some really key fish flipping that on grass edges and thick cover and things like that. So those were 2 key jigs that got really good bites and caught big fish for me during the tournament season. Number 1, typically thought as a situational bait and a specialty bait, but this year it was a really big mainstay to me, and that was the hollow body frog. For me, it was the Spro 65 and the Mad Max. Here's one of the Spro 65s rigged up in the black blue color. This was awesome. Many big fish, lots of 3 to 4 pounders on the Mississippi River were caught on this, along with the Mad Max frog. Both the Spro frog and the Mad Max, blacks, whites, natural browns, those were the key colors. Sometimes I put a few rattles in them when I was fishing really thick mats. Now, the true tungsten Mad Max frog is no longer made. You might be able to scoop them up on eBays or on tackle stores. If you find them, scoop them up. They're a pretty sweet frog. Otherwise, the Spro, the Terminator, there's other great frogs. Almost half of the fish weighed in tournaments where I cast check were caught on a frog this year. Now, it's a little bit limited, usually when water is in the upper 50s to low 60s, and so it kind of brackets the season. So really, in the time of the year where the frogs were effective, it dominated the tournaments that I did really well in. In the end, it was jigs, chatterbaits, and frogs that did most of the damage, both fun fishing and in my best tournament finish. If any of these baits caught your eye, I'll have links in the description down below. If you want to check them out, you can click the links, see what they're all about. And if you end up buying them, a little bit comes back to the channel and it helps everybody out. Also, I believe the 3 days that I didn't weigh a limit, it was more about decision-making, timing, and location, not really the lures I was fishing. It also reinforces my belief that bladed jigs, frogs, jigs are big fish baits. They catch better than quality fish, and they're essential for any good tournament angler to have in their arsenal to be successful. If you struggle getting bigger bites when you need them, whether it's fun fishing or tournaments, consider adapting any of these 3 techniques into your arsenal and working on them for the upcoming season. If you're at all interested to see how the most productive baits from last year compared to this year, check out this next video right here.